Most people spend their entire lives begging God for things they already possess. They pray with clenched fists, demanding, pleading, bargaining. But Joel Goldsmith discovered something revolutionary. God isn't withholding anything from you. The universe is already pouring infinite abundance into your life. The problem isn't God's unwillingness to give. The problem is your inability to receive. What if I told you that every prayer request actually pushes away what you desire? Every time you ask God for healing, you're affirming that you're sick. Every time you beg for abundance, you're declaring your poverty. This isn't how spiritual power works. Joel Goldsmith spent decades teaching a different way, the art of receptivity. Today, you'll discover the ancient secret that transforms beggars into receivers. You'll learn why asking is the language of separation, while receiving is the language of oneness. This isn't positive thinking. This is consciousness transformation. And it changes everything, though the shift takes dedicated practice over weeks and months. The secret Joel Goldsmith taught is deceptively simple. Stop asking and start acknowledging what already is. In the silence of your being, God's infinite supply is already flowing. Healing is already present. Abundance is already yours. Peace is already established. Your job isn't to create these things through desperate prayer. Your only task is to open yourself to receive what's already given. Think of a radio that's always broadcasting. The music doesn't start when you turn on your receiver. The music was always there. You simply tuned in. This is the consciousness shift that Joel called practicing the presence. When you stop asking God for things, something miraculous occurs. You begin to feel the divine flow that was blocked by your own resistance. Your asking created a wall between you and infinite supply. Your receiving opens the floodgates. But this isn't instant. It requires patient cultivation of receptive awareness. Here's what happens in your consciousness when you shift from asking to receiving. Your entire energy changes. Asking carries the vibration of lack, desperation, separation from your good. It says, I don't have this, and I need God to give it to me. This very attitude blocks the flow of divine grace into your experience. Receiving carries the vibration of fullness, gratitude, and union with God. It says, I recognize that God's infinite nature is my nature. What God has, I have. What God is, I am. This isn't arrogance. This is spiritual truth. Joel taught that Christ consciousness means recognizing your oneness with the divine source. When you receive instead of ask, you're no longer a beggar at heaven's gate. You're a child in your Father's house, recognizing that everything the Father has is already yours. This shift in consciousness from poverty to abundance thinking takes time to stabilize, but every moment of receptive awareness builds your new spiritual foundation. The practice itself is beautifully simple, though mastery requires patience. Sit quietly, and instead of presenting God with your shopping list of needs, simply say inwardly, I am now open to receive all that God is giving me. Feel yourself as an open channel. Imagine divine substance flowing into every area of your life. Health, relationships, finances, purpose. Don't force anything. Don't visualize specific outcomes. Don't manipulate. Simply be receptive, like the earth receives rain, like your lungs receive air, like a flower receives sunlight. This is natural, effortless, spiritual breathing. Joel called it resting in God. You're not making anything happen. You're allowing what already is. Practice this receptive awareness for just 10 minutes daily. Some days you'll feel nothing. Other days, you'll sense a profound peace or sudden knowing. Don't judge your progress. You're reconditioning decades of poverty consciousness. This is deep work that unfolds gradually, transforming your relationship with the divine from transaction to communion. Let me share Maria's story. She'd prayed for financial breakthrough for 3 years. Every month, same desperate prayers, same mounting debt, same anxiety. Her asking had become almost violent in its intensity. She'd shake her fists at heaven, demanding God answer her. Yet her situation only worsened, creating a cycle of spiritual frustration. Then Maria discovered Joel Goldsmith's teaching on receptivity. At first, she resisted. If I stop asking, God will forget about me, she protested. But desperation made her willing to try. For 30 days, She practiced simply receiving instead of asking. She'd sit quietly morning and evening, opening her consciousness to divine supply. The first 2 weeks felt empty, almost scary. Nothing seemed to be happening externally. But internally, something was shifting. The knot of anxiety in her chest began to loosen. A strange peace replaced her panic. By week 3, unexpected opportunities started appearing. A freelance project, a debt forgiven, a forgotten refund check. 6 months later, Maria's financial situation had completely transformed. But more importantly, her relationship with God had changed. She no longer approached the divine as a beggar, but as a beloved child receiving her inheritance. The outer abundance followed the inner shift in consciousness, proving Joel's teaching true. David's healing journey illustrates this principle powerfully. Diagnosed with a chronic condition, he'd spent 5 years in desperate healing prayers. He'd attended every prayer meeting, anointed himself with oil, declared healing scriptures. Yet his body remained sick. His asking had become aggressive, almost angry at God for not responding to his faithful petitions. A friend introduced him to Joel Goldsmith's writings on spiritual healing. The concept startled him. What if healing wasn't something God needed to send, but something already present in his true spiritual nature? What if his asking was actually the obstacle preventing him from experiencing the wholeness that was already his? David began practicing receptive awareness. Instead of begging for healing, he'd sit quietly and affirm, "I am open to receive the perfect health that is my divine inheritance." He stopped fighting his symptoms and started resting in the presence of God. This wasn't denial of his condition. It was recognition of a deeper spiritual reality. Progress came gradually over many months. Some days were harder than others. But slowly, symptoms began shifting. More importantly, fear released its grip. Within a year, medical tests confirmed what David already felt: significant improvement. His doctor called it spontaneous remission. David called it learning to receive what God had already given. Jennifer's story reveals how this principle works in relationships. She'd prayed for years for her troubled marriage to heal. Her prayers were filled with requests. "Please change my husband, make him understand me, fix our communication, save this marriage." She was exhausting herself asking God to transform her circumstances and her partner. When she encountered Joel's teaching, resistance arose immediately. "If I stop asking God to fix my marriage, it will definitely fall apart." But her current approach clearly wasn't working. She decided to experiment. Instead of asking God to change her husband, she practiced receiving divine love and peace into her own consciousness. Each morning she'd sit quietly and open herself to receive God's love, not asking for anything external to change, but allowing her inner being to be filled with divine presence. The shift was subtle at first. She noticed herself responding differently to her husband. Less reactive, more peaceful, genuinely more loving without effort or pretense. Over several months, something remarkable happened. As Jennifer changed her consciousness from asking to receiving, her husband began responding differently. The relationship dynamics shifted. They weren't magically perfect, but genuine healing occurred. Jennifer learned that when you stop asking God to change others and start receiving God's nature yourself, everything around you transforms naturally. Thomas faced bankruptcy after his business collapsed. His prayers became desperate negotiations with God. "I'll serve you forever if you just save my business. I'll give more to charity. I'll be a better person. Please, God, don't let me lose everything." His asking was filled with fear, bargaining, and the exhausting energy of trying to convince God. Joel Goldsmith's teaching came to Thomas through a book someone left at a coffee shop. The title grabbed him, The Art of Spiritual Healing. Reading it, Thomas encountered a completely different approach to prayer. Instead of begging God for business success, he learned to practice receptive consciousness, opening himself to divine guidance and supply. Thomas began 20-minute daily sessions of simply receiving. "I am open to the infinite supply of God. I receive divine guidance for my next steps. I rest in the knowledge that God's abundance is my abundance." He stopped the frantic energy of asking and entered the peaceful energy of receiving. Ideas began flowing, connections appeared, opportunities manifested. 18 months later, Thomas had not only recovered but had created a more successful business aligned with his true purpose. The external success mattered less than his inner transformation. He'd learned that God wasn't withholding anything. He'd simply been too busy asking to notice what was already being given. Receptivity opened his eyes to see and his hands to grasp divine supply that had surrounded him all along. If these transformation stories inspire you to shift from asking to receiving, like this video, to help others discover Joel Goldsmith's wisdom, subscribe for more consciousness-changing teachings, and comment. Which story resonated most deeply with your own spiritual journey? Beyond basic receptive awareness, Joel Goldsmith taught several complementary practices that deepen your ability to receive from God. The first is what he called the practice of the presence. Throughout your day, pause frequently and simply acknowledge, God is present here and now. This isn't asking God to show up. It's recognizing the divine presence that's already here. You can do this while washing dishes, driving, working, waiting in line. Brief moments of acknowledging presence. God is here. The infinite is expressing right where I am. Divine intelligence is operating in this situation. These micro-practices train your consciousness to remain in receptive mode rather than slipping back into asking mode throughout your day. Another powerful technique is gratitude recognition. But not gratitude for what you want to receive. Gratitude for what's already being given that you haven't noticed. Thank you for the breath flowing into my lungs without my asking. Thank you for my heart beating without my requesting. Thank you for the intelligence running my body's systems. This shifts you from future-focused asking to present-moment receiving. You begin recognizing the millions of gifts already flowing to you every second. Your consciousness expands from scarcity to abundance awareness. You're not trying to get God to give. You're noticing what God is already giving. This awareness naturally opens you to receive more in every dimension of life. Joel also taught the power of inner listening as a receiving practice. Most prayer is talking at God, asking, requesting, petitioning, pleading. But true prayer is listening to God. Set aside time daily for silent receptivity, not asking for anything, not even thinking spiritual thoughts, simply listening with your inner being for the still, small voice. This listening isn't passive. It's alert, attentive, open, like a musician listening for a distant melody, like a lover listening for footsteps. You're listening for divine guidance, for the inner knowing, for the intuitive wisdom that arises when your mind becomes quiet enough to hear. This is how Joel received many of his deepest spiritual insights. In this listening receptivity, solutions to problems appear without you asking for them. Creative ideas flow without you demanding them. Peace settles without you pursuing it. You discover that God is constantly speaking, constantly giving, constantly pouring wisdom and love into your consciousness. You were just too busy asking to hear the answers already being given. Practice 15 minutes of pure listening daily. Some days you'll hear clear inner guidance. Other days will feel silent. Both are valuable. You're training yourself to be receptive rather than demanding. You're creating space for God to fill you with divine substance. Over weeks and months, this practice transforms your entire approach to spirituality from effort to grace. Another Joel Goldsmith technique for receiving is contemplative reading of spiritual truth. But not reading to gain information. Reading to open yourself to revelation. Take a single spiritual idea, perhaps from scripture or spiritual text, and contemplate it slowly. Let it sink into your consciousness. Receive its deeper meaning without asking what it means. For example, contemplate, I and the Father are one. Don't analyze it intellectually. Don't ask God to help you understand it. Simply hold it in consciousness and let its truth reveal itself to you. Receive the revelation that naturally arises when you stop asking and start opening. This is receptive meditation, or contemplate that the kingdom of God is within you. Sit with that statement. Feel into it. What does it mean for God's infinite kingdom to be within your own consciousness? Don't ask for understanding. Receive the understanding that emerges from silent contemplation. This is how spiritual wisdom becomes living experience rather than mere concept. Joel emphasized that truth reveals itself to the receptive consciousness. You don't have to beg for enlightenment. You simply have to stop blocking it with your asking. When you receive rather than demand, spiritual insight flows naturally. Practice this contemplative receiving with one spiritual statement daily. Let truth reveal itself to your open, receptive awareness. The final complementary practice is releasing treatment. In the spiritual healing work Joel taught, he emphasized that we don't treat conditions. We don't ask God to fix problems. Instead, we treat our consciousness to receive the truth of wholeness that already exists. This is subtle but revolutionary. You're not trying to change reality. You're opening yourself to perceive reality as it truly is. When facing any challenge, instead of asking God to remove it, practice this. I release this situation to divine intelligence. I open myself to receive God's perfect solution. I rest in the truth that infinite wisdom is already resolving this in ways I cannot see. This isn't passive resignation. It's active receptivity. You're acknowledging that God's intelligence is already at work in your situation. Your asking might actually interfere with divine solutions already in motion. Your receiving allows those solutions to become visible and manifest. It's the difference between pushing a river and floating with its current. Both involve water, but one exhausts you while the other carries you. Practice this releasing receiving with one challenge you're currently facing. Stop asking God to fix it. Start receiving divine wisdom about it. Notice how your relationship to the problem changes. Notice how solutions begin appearing that your asking consciousness couldn't perceive. This is the power of receiving over asking, and it transforms every area of your life gradually over time. Let's address the challenges you'll face when shifting from asking to receiving. The first and biggest obstacle is the feeling that you're doing nothing. Asking feels active, powerful, like you're taking charge. Receiving feels passive, lazy, like you're giving up. Your ego will scream, you have to ask, you have to pursue, you have to make things happen. This is where most people abandon the practice and return to desperate asking. They interpret the quiet peace of receiving as spiritual inactivity. But receiving is the most powerful spiritual action there is. It requires tremendous trust to stop asking and simply open yourself to what God is already giving. Your ego fears this surrender. When this resistance arises, and it will, remind yourself, asking is the energy of separation and lack. Receiving is the energy of oneness and abundance. The feeling of doing nothing is actually the feeling of stopping your interference with divine flow. You're not being passive, you're being receptive, which is profoundly active in the spiritual dimension. Expect this challenge especially in the first weeks. Some days you'll convince yourself that receiving isn't working and you need to return to asking. Notice this pattern without judgment. Gently return to receptive awareness. Over time, you'll experience enough results to trust the process. But the early phase requires faith even when everything in you screams to start asking again. Another major challenge is the delay between shifting consciousness and seeing results. You might practice receiving for days or weeks without any visible change in your circumstances. Your bank account still empty, your body still sick, your relationship still broken. The temptation becomes overwhelming to return to asking, bargaining, and pleading with God. Joel Goldsmith warned about this challenge specifically. Consciousness shift always precedes manifestation shift. Your inner transformation must stabilize before your outer world reflects it. This delay is actually a gift. It tests whether you're truly receiving or just asking in a different way. Are you receiving because you trust God or because you want results? When you face this delay, and most people do, use it to deepen your practice. This is when you discover whether you're truly learning receptivity or just using a new technique to manipulate God. True receiving continues even when nothing seems to be happening externally. It's receiving for its own sake, not for results. Many people give up right before their breakthrough. They practice receiving for 3 weeks, see no results, and return to desperate asking. Then they miss the manifestation that was about to appear. Trust that consciousness shift is happening even when circumstances haven't changed yet. The outer always follows the inner, but there's often a gap. Practice patience during this challenging phase. A third challenge is the social pressure to ask. When you tell others about your problems, they'll immediately suggest you pray and ask God for help. If you explain that you're practicing receiving instead, they might accuse you of spiritual passivity or lacking faith. You have to ask God. The Bible says, "Ask and you shall receive." This social pressure can shake your confidence in the receiving practice. You'll wonder if everyone else is right and Joel Goldsmith was wrong. You'll question whether you're being spiritually lazy. The asking paradigm is so deeply embedded in religious culture that choosing the receiving paradigm can feel lonely and heretical at times. Here's how to navigate this challenge. You don't need to convince anyone else or defend your practice. Simply do what works for your consciousness. If people want to ask, let them ask. If you've discovered that receiving opens your awareness to God's already present gifts, quietly continue your practice. Results will speak louder than explanations. You might also find it helpful to frame receiving in familiar religious language when talking to others. Instead of saying, "I don't ask God for anything," you might say, "I'm practicing resting in God's presence and trusting divine timing." This honors their paradigm while protecting your practice. Eventually, your transformation will be its own testimony to the power of receiving. The final major challenge is what Joel called taking the gift and running. This happens when receiving produces results and you immediately shift back to asking mode. You receive healing, then start asking God to heal something else. You receive financial supply, then start asking for more. You use receiving as just another way to get things from God. This defeats the entire purpose. Receiving isn't a technique to manipulate better results from God. It's a consciousness transformation from seeing yourself as separate from God to recognizing your oneness with divine source. When you receive a gift and immediately start asking for more, you're back in poverty consciousness, treating God like a vending machine. The challenge is to remain in receiving consciousness even after manifestations appear. Continue practicing receptivity not because you want more things, but because you've discovered your true spiritual identity. You're not a beggar who occasionally receives handouts. You're a child of God living in continuous flow of divine substance. This identity shift is the real goal. When results come from your receiving practice, pause and deepen your gratitude. Recognize that this manifestation is evidence of the infinite supply always available to your receptive consciousness. Don't immediately jump to the next lack. Rest in the abundance you're experiencing. Let receiving become your permanent state of consciousness, not just a temporary technique to get what asking couldn't produce. If these challenge-breaking insights resonate with your spiritual journey, like to support authentic consciousness teachings, subscribe for advanced Joel Goldsmith practices, and comment, which obstacle are you most ready to transform through the power of receptivity? Let's explore advanced applications of receiving consciousness in daily life. Start with your morning routine. Most people begin their day asking God for strength, guidance, protection, success. What if you began instead by simply receiving? I open myself to receive all that God is pouring into this day. I am receptive to divine guidance, energy, love, and wisdom. This subtle shift changes your entire day's energy. You're not approaching life from lack, needing God to give you what you don't have. You're approaching from abundance, recognizing that divine substance is already flowing. Your job is to notice it, receive it, allow it. This receptive posture attracts opportunities, insights, and connections that asking consciousness blocks. Throughout your day, practice micro moments of receiving. Before a difficult conversation, instead of asking God for the right words, receive. I am open to divine wisdom, speaking through me. Before a challenging task, instead of asking for strength, receive. I receive the infinite energy that is my true nature. Each situation becomes an opportunity to practice receptivity. Notice how this changes your relationship with daily stress. When you're asking God to help you through challenges, you're reinforcing the belief that challenges are real and powerful. When you're receiving divine presence in challenges, you're recognizing that God's infinite nature is greater than any circumstance. This shift in consciousness transforms how you experience even ordinary moments, though integration takes consistent practice. Advanced receiving practice includes what Joel called impersonal meditation. This addresses a subtle trap many spiritual seekers fall into. They stop asking God for things but start asking for spiritual experiences. They want enlightenment, mystical visions, spiritual powers. This is just asking in disguise. True receiving is impersonal, wanting nothing, including spiritual attainment. In impersonal meditation, You practice receiving without any agenda whatsoever. You're not receiving to get healing. You're not receiving to manifest abundance. You're not even receiving to become more spiritual. You're simply resting in receptive awareness for its own sake. This is the highest form of spiritual practice Joel taught. Sit in complete stillness and openness. No goals, no desires, no spiritual ambitions. Just pure receptivity to whatever is. This might feel empty at first. Your mind will panic. What's the point if I'm not getting anything? But this is precisely the point. You're learning to receive God's being rather than God's gifts. You're experiencing union rather than transaction. This impersonal receiving gradually transforms your entire consciousness. You stop approaching spirituality as a means to an end and start experiencing it as an end in itself. God becomes not a resource to tap, but a presence to dwell in. This is the ultimate shift from asking to receiving, and it changes everything about how you live, though few people reach this level quickly. Another advanced practice is receiving on behalf of others without them knowing. Someone shares a problem with you. The automatic response is to promise you'll pray and ask God to help them. But what if you instead practice receiving divine truth for them? Silently, you open your consciousness to receive the truth of their spiritual wholeness, abundance, and divine protection. You're not asking God to fix them. You're receiving the truth of what they already are in divine consciousness. This is how Joel practiced spiritual healing. He didn't petition God to heal sick people. He opened his consciousness to receive the truth that sickness has no reality in spiritual consciousness. Only wholeness exists in God, therefore only wholeness truly exists. This practice is subtle and powerful. You might be in conversation with someone describing their problems. Internally, you're not agreeing with their problem consciousness. You're silently receiving divine truth. I receive the truth of this person's infinite nature. I am open to the recognition of their perfect spiritual wholeness. You don't argue with them. You hold receptive space for truth. Over time, you'll notice that people in your presence often experience shifts without you saying anything spiritual. Your receptive consciousness creates a space where they can receive their own healing, guidance, or breakthrough. This is advanced spiritual practice. You're not trying to change anyone. You're simply receiving truth so clearly that it dissolves false appearances in the consciousness of those around you. The most advanced application of receiving consciousness is what Joel called living the illumined life. This is when receiving becomes so natural that you no longer distinguish between spiritual practice and daily living. Your entire existence becomes one continuous flow of receiving divine presence, guidance, and substance. You're not practicing meditation. You are meditation. In this state, challenges still arise, but you meet them from receiving consciousness automatically. Financial pressure appears, and without thinking, you're already open to receive divine supply. Health issues emerge, and your consciousness is already receptive to spiritual wholeness. Relationship conflicts occur, and you're already receiving divine love and wisdom. This isn't perfection. Joel himself said there were days of doubt and fear, but the foundation is different. Your default setting is receiving rather than asking. When you slip into asking mode, you notice it quickly and gently return to receptivity. The consciousness of poverty and separation no longer dominates your spiritual life. Abundance and oneness are your natural state. Reaching this level takes years of dedicated practice for most people. Don't be discouraged by that timeline. Every day of practicing receiving moves you closer to this illumined life. Every moment you choose receptivity over asking rewires your consciousness. You're not trying to achieve some future state. You're opening to what's already present. That's the beauty of receiving. The gift is already given. You're simply learning to notice. Let's talk about what happens when receiving consciousness becomes your permanent state. First, your relationship with God fundamentally transforms. God is no longer a cosmic parent you petition for favors. God becomes the infinite presence you dwell in, the divine consciousness you share, the eternal source you recognize as your own being. This doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you humble in a completely different way. You're not special because God gives you things. You're ordinary because what God is, everyone is. The only difference is consciousness. Some people know they're already receiving. Others are still trapped in asking. Your job is to know, and eventually to help others discover what you found. Prayer becomes completely different. You no longer approach prayer as negotiation or petition. Prayer becomes awareness, recognition, acknowledgement of what already is. God is present. Infinite love is here. Divine wisdom is operating. Perfect supply is flowing. You're not trying to make these things true. You're recognizing they're already true and opening yourself to receive them. This consciousness shift affects every relationship in your life. You stop asking people to complete you and start receiving the love you already are. You stop demanding circumstances change and start receiving the peace that exists beneath circumstances. You stop pursuing happiness externally and start receiving the joy that is your spiritual nature. Life becomes receiving rather than achieving. When you live in receiving consciousness, you notice that things come to you rather than you chasing them. Opportunities appear without your seeking. Solutions arise without your struggle. Resources flow without your manipulation. This isn't magic. This is the natural result of aligning your consciousness with the divine flow that's always been present but was blocked by your asking. Your decision-making transforms. Instead of asking God to show you which path to take, you quiet yourself and receive divine guidance. An inner knowing arises, a subtle sense of rightness, a peaceful clarity. You don't force decisions through analysis and anxiety. You receive them from the infinite intelligence operating in your consciousness. Your creative expression flourishes. Artists, writers, entrepreneurs, and creators understand this. The best work comes not from striving, but from receiving. When you're in receptive consciousness, ideas flow. Inspiration strikes. Solutions appear fully formed. You're not creating from personal effort. You're receiving what's already complete in divine mind. Even your body responds differently. Stress decreases because you're not constantly in the asking energy of pursuit and lack. Your nervous system relaxes into the receiving energy of trust and abundance. Many physical symptoms that were rooted in consciousness of separation and fear begin to dissolve naturally as you rest in receptive oneness with divine source. This is gradual but genuine transformation. Living from receiving consciousness doesn't mean you never take action. Joel emphasized that receptivity leads to inspired action, which is completely different from desperate action. When you receive divine guidance, you act from inner direction rather than outer pressure. Your actions become effortless, flowing, aligned with the universe rather than fighting against it. You also discover that receiving consciousness naturally makes you generous. When you know you're living in infinite divine supply, sharing becomes natural. You're not asking God to give you more so you can hoard it. You're receiving constant flow, so giving is simply allowing that flow to move through you to others. This generosity isn't sacrifice, it's recognition of the endless supply. Your presence becomes healing to others. People are drawn to you without understanding why. They feel peaceful in your company. Problems seem less overwhelming when they're around you. This isn't your personal power. It's the divine presence flowing through your receiving consciousness. You've become a clear channel for God's love, wisdom, and healing energy. Challenges still arise in this consciousness, but you meet them differently. Instead of, "Why is this happening to me?" you ask, "What is trying to emerge through this situation?" You receive challenges as invitations to deepen receptivity rather than evidence that God has abandoned you. This shift in perspective changes your entire experience of life's difficulties. The ultimate truth Joel Goldsmith revealed is this: you are not separate from God, trying to receive gifts from an external source. You are the very consciousness of God, receiving awareness of your own infinite nature. When you practice receiving, you're not getting something new. You're removing the veil that blocked your recognition of what has always been yours. This is why asking never worked. You were asking yourself to give yourself what you already had. You were demanding that God provide what God has never stopped providing. The problem was never God's unwillingness to give. The problem was your inability to receive because your consciousness was focused on lack rather than abundance, on separation rather than oneness. Now you understand why Joel emphasized stopping asking and starting receiving. Every moment you spend in receptive awareness, you're practicing the truth of your being. You're not becoming spiritual. You're recognizing the spirituality you've always been. You're not acquiring divine nature. You're receiving awareness of the divine nature that is your eternal reality. This is your new life, a life of continuous receiving. Not receiving things, though things will come. Receiving the presence of God as your own consciousness. Receiving the infinite abundance of the universe as your natural inheritance. Receiving the love, wisdom, peace, and power that have always been yours. Stop asking. Start receiving. Everything changes when you do. If your understanding of prayer and spirituality has been forever transformed by Joel Goldsmith's teaching on receiving consciousness, like this video to spread this life-changing wisdom, subscribe for more advanced spiritual teachings, and comment, "I am transformed," to declare your shift from asking to receiving consciousness.
Joel Goldsmith, one of the 20th century's most profound mystical teachers, discovered something remarkable about these words that has the power to completely transform how you approach every challenge in your life. Stay with me until the end, because understanding this principle could be the difference between struggling through life and experiencing a level of peace and fulfillment you've only dreamed possible. Have you ever wondered what would change in your life if you discovered that everything you're desperately praying for has already been given to you? What if the greatest spiritual secret of all time has been hiding in plain sight for over 2,000 years, misunderstood by millions, yet holding the key to transforming every area of your existence? Those three simple words Jesus spoke on the cross, "It is finished," are perhaps the most misunderstood spiritual revelation ever uttered. Has this ever happened to you? You hear a familiar biblical phrase repeated throughout your life, but one day it suddenly strikes you with completely new meaning. That's exactly what we're exploring today. But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the globe. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Most people believe Jesus was simply announcing the end of his earthly journey, a surrender to death, a final breath before departing this world. But what if that interpretation completely misses the revolutionary truth he was actually revealing? What if, in that moment, Jesus wasn't declaring defeat, but was instead gifting humanity with the most powerful spiritual principle ever conceived? Imagine for a moment, what if every financial worry, health concern, relationship conflict, and personal struggle you're facing right now is already resolved in what Goldsmith calls the eternal now of spiritual reality? What if your prayers seem unanswered, not because God isn't listening, but because you're asking for something that already exists? This isn't about positive thinking or merely changing your attitude. What you're about to discover might surprise you. It's about recognizing a fundamental truth about the nature of reality itself. In spiritual consciousness, there is no healing needed because there is no actual disease. There is no abundance to manifest because infinite supply already exists. There is no relationship to fix because love is already whole and complete. Everything you think you need to achieve, acquire, or become has already been accomplished in divine reality. Your job isn't to create what you need, it's to recognize what already is. Now let's dive deeper into this revolutionary concept that has transformed countless lives. When we truly understand that it is done, we begin to see that our entire approach to prayer, manifestation, and spiritual growth has been backward. Instead of desperately working to create something new, we've been invited to recognize what already exists. This revelation completely transforms our approach to life's challenges. Think about this powerful analogy for a moment. Imagine standing knee-deep in a flowing river, desperately thirsty, begging and pleading for water. You're surrounded by exactly what you need, yet completely unaware of its presence. The water isn't absent. Your recognition of it is. This perfectly illustrates the hidden truth behind "it is done." The very things we're praying for, visualizing and struggling to manifest are already present in the divine reality that surrounds us. The transformation occurs not when something new appears, but when our perception shifts to recognize what was always there. This revelation creates a profound mindset shift that impacts every area of life. When financial challenges arise, most of us instinctively respond with anxiety and fear. We send desperate prayers skyward, begging for resources to appear, for doors to open, for miraculous provision. But through this new understanding, we can see how backward this approach truly is. If it is finished, then divine supply already exists in spiritual consciousness. The journey isn't about creating abundance through desperate manifestation techniques. It's about resting in the truth that abundance is already established as your spiritual birthright. This doesn't mean we sit passively while bills pile up, making no practical efforts. Rather, it means we take inspired action from an entirely different inner place. Consider the difference. When you make phone calls from a place of lack and desperation, your energy communicates scarcity. But when those same calls come from a consciousness of completeness, your decisions and words flow from wisdom rather than fear. The external actions might look similar to observers, but the consciousness behind them creates vastly different results. If these spiritual insights have touched something deep within you, hit that subscribe button to join our community of seekers. Together, we'll explore the profound truths that transform not just what we think, but how we experience life itself. I've witnessed this principle transform lives in remarkable ways. People facing financial ruin who shifted their inner approach, not by denying their circumstances, but by recognizing a deeper spiritual reality beneath the appearances, found pathways opening that were previously invisible. Opportunities appeared, solutions emerged, and resources manifested not because they created something new, but because they aligned with what was already there. Now, I want to go even deeper into how this understanding translates into practical healing experiences. The revelation of "it is done" isn't just philosophical. It has demonstrated extraordinary power in addressing physical and emotional suffering. If this perspective is beginning to shift something in your understanding, write "recognition, not creation" in the comments below. When we begin to grasp that spiritual wholeness isn't something to achieve, but something to recognize, we unlock the same healing power that Joel Goldsmith used to help thousands of people transform their physical and emotional conditions. His approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. When someone came to him with a diagnosis or illness, he didn't see a disease that needed healing. Instead, he perceived the finished spiritual perfection that was already true beneath the appearance of sickness. This wasn't denial or wishful thinking. It was a profound recognition of a deeper reality. What made Goldsmith's work so remarkable was that this recognition of completeness allowed the other person's consciousness to shift. Sometimes this happened dramatically in an instant. Other times, it unfolded gradually over weeks or months. But the transformation always came from the same source, recognizing what was already finished in divine reality, rather than fighting against what appeared to be true on the surface. This healing principle reveals a hidden truth about consciousness itself. Our experience of life doesn't come from external circumstances, but from our inner recognition. When we shift our perception from seeing brokenness to recognizing wholeness, our external world begins to reflect that inner journey. The body, relationships, and circumstances naturally align with our deepest recognition. The practical technique is deceptively simple, which is precisely why many people miss it entirely. When a problem appears in your life, whether physical symptoms, financial strain, or relationship conflict, your first response shouldn't be desperate prayer for change or immediate action. Instead, the most powerful first step is silence. Not an empty silence of resignation, but a filled silence of recognition. In this sacred space of quiet, you simply acknowledge, in spiritual reality, this is already finished. God's work is complete. What appears as a problem is only my limited perception of something already resolved in divine consciousness. You don't need to emotionally feel this truth at first. The revelations come through consistently acknowledging it mentally until your consciousness naturally shifts. This practice might take 5 minutes or 5 weeks. The timeline is irrelevant because in spiritual reality, time doesn't exist. What exists is the eternal, finished nature of divine creation, which includes your body, your relationships, and your supply. This mindset transformation isn't about positive thinking or affirmations. It's about aligning your perception with what is already spiritually true. When you stop trying to make something happen and start recognizing what has already happened in consciousness, you align with divine reality. That alignment is what we call healing, prosperity, and harmony. But these aren't achievements. They're recognitions of the finished kingdom that was always present. I'd like to share with you some real-world examples of how this principle has transformed lives in seemingly impossible situations. If you've ever experienced a moment where your perception suddenly shifted and changed your entire reality, type, "I've experienced this shift" in the comments. When we examine these stories closely, we see a consistent pattern that anyone can apply, regardless of their circumstances. Consider Sarah, a single mother who found herself in what appeared to be an impossible financial situation. With 3 children depending on her, an eviction notice on her door, and only $70 in her bank account, her external reality painted a picture of complete lack. She had already tried everything the world recommends: desperate prayers, endless job applications, and outreach to every assistance program available. Nothing had changed. The turning point in Sarah's journey wasn't finding more resources. It was discovering this profound principle of recognition. At first, she was skeptical, even angry, at the suggestion that her crisis was already resolved when the eviction notice was painfully real. How could her supply be complete when her bank account clearly showed otherwise? This initial resistance is completely natural. It represents the journey we all face when shifting from surface appearances to deeper reality. For 2 weeks, Sarah practiced a different approach. Each morning, she sat in silence, acknowledging that in spiritual reality, her supply was already complete. She didn't immediately feel peaceful or see money appear, but gradually, her consciousness shifted from panic to a quiet certainty that transcended her circumstances. She still took practical action, still applied for jobs and made calls, but from an entirely different inner foundation. The revelation came in the 3rd week, when a former colleague called about a position she hadn't even applied for. The timing aligned perfectly, and the salary matched exactly what she needed. Was this mere coincidence? Sarah noticed something significant. The opportunity appeared only after her consciousness had shifted from desperately seeking to quietly knowing. The external provision matched her internal recognition that it was already finished. This same pattern appeared in Marcus's journey with chronic pain. For 8 years following a car accident, he had exhausted every avenue of relief. Multiple surgeries, medications, spiritual techniques, energy healing, and meditation retreats. Some approaches provided temporary relief, but the pain always returned, creating a cycle of hope and disappointment that became almost as debilitating as the pain itself. When Marcus encountered this principle of recognizing completion instead of seeking healing, his skepticism was matched only by his desperation. For 6 weeks he practiced resting in the truth that in divine reality his body was already perfect and whole. This wasn't about denying his pain or pretending it wasn't there. He acknowledged it as a limited perception of something already resolved spiritually while continuing his physical therapy and medical care. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or dramatic. Around week 7, he realized he'd gone 2 days without thinking about the pain. By week 12, the intensity had decreased by 60%. 6 months later, the chronic pain that had dominated his life for 8 years had disappeared completely. His doctors couldn't explain it medically, but Marcus understood. When his consciousness recognized the finished work, his physical experience gradually aligned with that recognition. These stories reveal something crucial about the relationship between consciousness and experience. Our external world doesn't create our consciousness. Our consciousness creates our experience. When we fundamentally shift how we perceive reality, reality itself begins to shift in response. This isn't mystical thinking. It's a practical principle that operates in every area of life. But what about relationships? Can this same principle transform connections that seem irreparably broken? The story of one couple's journey from the brink of divorce reveals something even more profound about the power of recognition. If one of these stories resonates with your own experience or current situation, comment, "This speaks to my journey" below. The power of recognition becomes even more profound when we examine what happened in Jennifer and Robert's marriage. After 19 years together, their relationship had deteriorated to the point where divorce papers were being prepared. The resentment between them was so deep that communication had completely broken down. Both felt trapped in a cycle of hurt that seemed impossible to escape. What makes their story so illuminating is that the transformation began with just one person's shift in consciousness. When a friend gave Jennifer a book about recognizing spiritual wholeness in relationships, she began practicing this principle alone, without Robert's knowledge or participation. Every time anger arose toward her husband, she would pause and silently recognize, in spiritual truth, love is already complete between us. This isn't wishful thinking, this is recognition of divine reality. The remarkable aspect of this journey was that Jennifer wasn't trying to change Robert or fix their marriage through external means. She was simply shifting her own perception from seeing a broken relationship to recognizing the finished nature of love itself. For 3 weeks, nothing changed outwardly. Then Robert began noticing something different about Jennifer. Though he couldn't identify what had shifted, the atmosphere between them softened almost imperceptibly. Small openings appeared where actual conversations replaced bitter arguments. It took 7 months of Jennifer's consistent practice before Robert asked what had changed in her. They didn't experience an instant fairy tale reconciliation, but gradually rebuilt their connection on an entirely new foundation, recognizing spiritual completeness rather than trying to fix human brokenness. This revelation brings us to 3 essential practices that deepen our ability to recognize the finished kingdom in every area of life. The first is what Goldsmith called the practice of the presence. This means training yourself to acknowledge divine completeness in every moment, especially when problems appear. Not a God who will help you, but a presence whose perfect work is already established right where the problem seems to be. The second practice is resting in the Word. When you encounter a spiritual truth that resonates deeply, don't just acknowledge it intellectually and move on. Allow it to saturate your consciousness. If the statement, "It is finished," strikes you as profound, spend time sitting with those words, not analyzing them, not trying to make them work, just resting in their truth until they reveal deeper layers of meaning. The third practice is recognizing spiritual identity. Most problems exist because we identify as limited human beings who need things, lack things, and struggle with things. But in spiritual reality, our identity is already complete as the expression of divine consciousness. We're not humans trying to reach the divine. We're divine expressions mistakenly believing we're separate and limited. These three practices work together to create a fundamental shift in how we experience reality. They aren't techniques to manifest what we want, but rather pathways to recognize what already is. The practice of presence keeps us anchored in spiritual reality moment by moment. Resting in the Word allows truth to transform our understanding from within. Recognizing spiritual identity shifts our very sense of who we are. But this approach raises important questions. What happens when we face genuinely devastating circumstances? Is this merely spiritual bypass that ignores real problems? How do we reconcile this understanding with the undeniable challenges of human experience? If you've tried to practice spiritual principles during difficult times, type "the struggle is real" in the comments. Let's address the elephant in the room. The concern that recognizing it is finished in the midst of genuine crisis might just be spiritual bypass or toxic positivity. When you're facing overwhelming medical bills, when your body is racked with pain, or when your relationship is crumbling, acknowledging spiritual completeness can feel like denying reality. This resistance isn't just normal. It's actually a healthy sign that you're not settling for superficial spiritual platitudes. Goldsmith addressed this concern directly in his teaching. He emphasized that you're not denying the appearance or pretending problems don't exist on the human level. That would be spiritual bypass, and it doesn't lead to genuine transformation. Instead, you're recognizing that beneath the appearance is a spiritual reality that is already complete. Both levels exist simultaneously, the human appearance and the divine reality. The mistake most people make is trying to jump immediately from seeing a crisis to feeling complete peace about it. That's not how consciousness naturally shifts. The process begins with honest acknowledgement. Yes, the bank account is empty. Yes, the pain is real. Yes, the relationship is broken. Then underneath that acknowledgement, you begin recognizing, and yet in spiritual consciousness, this is already resolved. These seemingly contradictory truths coexist until your consciousness fully shifts. Even with this understanding, several implementation challenges typically arise. The first is impatience. Many people practice recognition for a few days, and when nothing changes externally, they conclude it doesn't work. This is where most abandon the teaching, often right before breakthrough would occur. Goldsmith was very clear about this reality. Consciousness shift takes time, sometimes days, sometimes weeks, occasionally months, for deeply ingrained patterns. Consider this perspective. You've spent years, maybe decades, building a consciousness of lack, fear, and limitation. That consciousness didn't form overnight, and it won't dissolve overnight either. Every time you practice recognition of completion, you're dissolving old patterns and establishing new neural pathways. This gradual process resembles strengthening a muscle or learning a language more than a magical overnight transformation. Ready to discover more spiritual wisdom that actually transforms your daily experience? Subscribe now and become part of a journey where we explore the mystical truths hidden in plain sight throughout history. Another common challenge is what Goldsmith called taking back the problem. You practice recognition, feel peaceful, maybe even experience some improvement. Then something triggers the old fear pattern, and you immediately forget everything you've recognized. You're back in panic mode, desperately praying for help, completely forgetting that it is finished. This cycle creates enormous frustration. Goldsmith taught that this pattern is part of the process, not a sign of failure. Old consciousness patterns don't dissolve linearly. They release in layers. You might have genuine recognition of completion, then face a trigger that brings back old fear. This doesn't mean you've lost your progress. It means another layer is ready to be released. The practice isn't about never forgetting, it's about how consistently you return to recognition after forgetting. A third significant challenge is spiritual isolation. When you begin practicing this approach, you'll likely discover that everyone around you still operates from lack consciousness. Your family might think you're being irresponsible when you remain calm during crisis. Friends worry you're in denial. Even your logical mind questions if you're delusional. This external pressure can shake your deepest convictions. These challenges aren't evidence that the principle doesn't work. They're natural aspects of the journey from human perception to spiritual recognition. But what about truly catastrophic situations? How does this principle hold up when facing life-threatening illness or complete financial devastation? If you've experienced one of these challenges on your spiritual journey, comment, "This resonates with my experience" below. Let's examine how this principle functions in the most extreme circumstances life can present. Michael's story provides a profound window into what's possible when spiritual recognition meets life's greatest challenge. After being diagnosed with stage 4 cancer and given just 3 months to live, Michael faced the ultimate test of everything he believed. As a devoted spiritual student who had meditated daily for years, his first response was feeling betrayed. Why hadn't his spiritual practice protected him from this devastating diagnosis? This reaction, this sense of betrayal, reveals something crucial about how many of us approach spirituality. We often practice as a form of insurance against suffering, as protection from life's hardest blows. But Michael's journey revealed a deeper truth. After 2 weeks of despair, he remembered Goldsmith's teaching on completion and realized that "it is finished" meant something entirely different than he'd understood. It meant that even within his diagnosis, spiritual perfection was already present. Not that the cancer wasn't real, but that underneath the appearance was unshakable, divine wholeness. What makes Michael's approach so illuminating is that he didn't choose between medicine and spiritual practice. He began recognizing spiritual completeness while still receiving full medical treatment. For 8 weeks, nothing changed externally. In fact, the cancer progressed, exactly as his doctors had predicted. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. His pain decreased slightly. His energy improved marginally. His doctors noted cautious optimism. Michael's story unfolded over 18 months of consistent recognition practice combined with medical care. The cancer went into remission, returned partially, then finally disappeared completely. His doctors called it unexplained spontaneous remission. But Michael understood the hidden truth behind his transformation. His consciousness had shifted from seeing himself as a person with cancer to recognizing his spiritual identity as the perfect expression of divine life. What's most remarkable isn't the physical healing, extraordinary as it was. It's how Michael lived during those 18 months of uncertainty. He maintained profound peace even when scan results were discouraging. He exhibited deep certainty even when symptoms temporarily worsened. His family witnessed someone facing potential death with inexplicable calm. This peace wasn't denial or resignation. It was the natural result of consciousness anchored in completion. Rebecca's journey through business catastrophe reveals another dimension of this principle. After investing everything into building a company with pure intentions, she faced bankruptcy that threatened to destroy her financially for years. The failure felt like cosmic punishment, raising the agonizing question, how could she have been so wrong? When Rebecca discovered Goldsmith's teaching on "it is finished," her initial reaction was anger. How dare someone suggest her crisis was already resolved when she was losing everything? But desperation makes us willing to try approaches we'd otherwise dismiss. She began practicing recognition not because she believed it, but because she had exhausted all other options. For the first month, nothing external changed. Her business continued declining. But internally, something subtle shifted. Rebecca found herself making clearer decisions from calm rather than panic. She negotiated better terms with creditors and identified which parts of the business to preserve and which to release. The revelation came when she realized that "it is finished" didn't mean her business would be saved as she wanted. It meant that in divine consciousness, her true purpose and supply were already established. And sometimes completion looks like endings, so new beginnings can emerge. 2 years later, Rebecca built a different business, aligned more authentically with her gifts. She came to understand that recognizing completion doesn't mean controlling outcomes according to your preferences. It means trusting that whatever unfolds is part of divine wisdom at work in your life, including through apparent failures. What's the difference between this spiritual maturity and merely accepting disappointment? The answer reveals how consciousness transformation actually works in our everyday lives. If you've ever experienced something you initially perceived as failure that later revealed itself as a doorway to something better, comment "divine redirection" below. The difference between spiritual maturity and merely accepting disappointment reveals the revolutionary nature of Goldsmith's teaching. When we first encounter spiritual principles, many of us approach them as sophisticated manifestation techniques, methods for getting what we want with less struggle. We read books promising that positive thinking or proper visualization will deliver our desired outcomes. This perspective represents the beginning stage of the spiritual journey. As we deepen in understanding, we discover that genuine spiritual maturity isn't about controlling circumstances to match our preferences. It's about recognizing divine wisdom already at work, even when, perhaps especially when, events unfold in ways we wouldn't choose. This represents a profound paradigm shift in how we approach life's challenges. Completion doesn't mean getting what you want. It means seeing perfection in what is, even in unwanted circumstances. This distinction separates magical thinking from authentic spiritual awakening. The beginner asks, "How can I use spiritual principles to fix my problems?" The mature practitioner asks, "How can I recognize the divine perfection already present within what appears as problems?" This shift in perspective doesn't happen overnight. It develops gradually through consistent practice and life experience. After months or years of recognizing completion, something profound happens in your consciousness. You stop dividing life into problems and solutions. You cease seeing yourself as someone who needs fixing or improving. You begin experiencing every moment, even difficult ones, as the continual unfolding of something already complete. This isn't a belief you hold intellectually, it's the consciousness you live from naturally. The practical transformation appears in unexpected ways throughout daily life. You notice you're not obsessively checking your bank balance anymore, not because you suddenly have unlimited wealth, but because your sense of security no longer depends on the numbers. You find yourself navigating difficult conversations without defensive reactions, not because you've mastered communication techniques, but because you're no longer protecting a vulnerable, incomplete self. Your physical well-being improves, you sleep better and have more energy. Not because you've discovered perfect health practices, but because anxiety isn't constantly depleting your system. Relationships deepen, even challenging ones, not because others change, but because you're approaching connections from completeness rather than need. These shifts happen gradually, almost imperceptibly, until one day you realize your entire relationship with life has fundamentally transformed. When Jesus said, "It is finished," he was speaking directly to you across 2,000 years. He was revealing that the spiritual work is already complete. You don't need to become worthy through spiritual practices, achieve enlightenment through years of meditation, or earn divine love through perfect behavior. You already are the finished expression of divine perfection. Your only task is recognizing this truth consistently enough that your human experience naturally aligns with spiritual reality. This recognition transforms everything, not because it magically changes external circumstances, though it often does, but because it changes you at the most fundamental level. You become someone who lives from completion instead of lack, from certainty instead of fear, from knowing instead of seeking. This represents the greatest transformation possible in human consciousness. The question now becomes, how do we implement this understanding in daily life? What specific practices help us maintain this recognition when faced with life's inevitable challenges? And what happens during those times when we completely forget and find ourselves back in the old consciousness of lack and limitation? If you're beginning to sense the profound implications of living from completion rather than striving, comment "living from is finished" below. What we've explored together today isn't just spiritual theory, it's a practical approach to transforming how you experience every aspect of life. This principle of "it is done" that Jesus revealed and Joel Goldsmith rediscovered offers us a profound shift in consciousness that changes everything from the inside out. As you move forward from this moment, I invite you to experiment with this practice of recognition in your daily life. Start with something small, a minor irritation or concern, and practice recognizing the spiritual completeness already present. Notice how your experience shifts, not because circumstances magically change, but because your perception transforms. Remember, you're not alone on this journey. This community is filled with others walking the same path, discovering what it means to live from completion rather than striving. If this message resonated with you today, perhaps it found you at exactly the right moment. If so, simply comment, "This found me at the perfect time," below. I'd truly love to hear about your experiences as you begin implementing these principles. Your insights not only help me create content that serves you better, but they also inspire others who might be facing similar challenges. If you found value in today's exploration, consider subscribing to join us on this journey of spiritual discovery. Each like you leave helps these teachings reach others who might be searching for exactly this message. There's a video right here that delves deeper into how to maintain this consciousness of completion during life's most challenging moments. Click and continue with me there as we explore the practical application of these principles in everyday life. Until next time, remember, you don't need to become complete. You simply need to recognize the completion that already exists within you. That recognition changes everything. Have you ever wondered why, despite years of spiritual seeking, prayer, and religious devotion, God still feels distant and unreachable? What if everything you've been taught about finding the divine has been leading you in the wrong direction all along? For centuries, humanity has been on a relentless quest for divine connection. We've built magnificent cathedrals and temples, we've studied ancient texts until the pages wore thin, we've followed spiritual teachers across continents, all searching for that elusive presence we call God. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when, despite all your devotion, you still feel something essential is missing? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. What Joel Goldsmith discovered through his profound spiritual journey might completely transform how you understand your relationship with the divine. The revolutionary truth that changed his life and could change yours is both shockingly simple and deeply profound. The Christ consciousness you've been desperately seeking outside yourself has always been within you. not as some vague spiritual concept or comforting belief, but as the fundamental reality of your very being. This isn't about adopting a new belief system or adding another spiritual practice to your already busy life. It's about recognizing what has always been true about you before any thought, emotion, or experience ever arose in your awareness. The divine presence isn't something you need to attain through years of disciplined practice or earn through righteous behavior. It's your original nature, your true spiritual identity that exists beyond all temporary human experiences that seem to define who you are. Stay with me until the end of this series, because what you're about to discover might surprise you in ways that could completely transform your experience of life itself. When you truly understand that Christ consciousness isn't a historical figure who lived 2,000 years ago or some distant deity sitting in judgment of your every action, but rather the very essence of your being, something miraculous happens. Imagine moving through your days from a place of inherent wholeness rather than constant seeking. Imagine relating to your challenges and difficulties from a consciousness of divine indifference, not callous disconnection, but unshakable inner peace that remains steady regardless of outer circumstances. What if the answer to the spiritual longing that's been driving your search has been present within you all along, quietly waiting for recognition beneath the noise of your thinking mind and the drama of your emotional life? What if the divine presence you've been seeking through books, teachers, and sacred places is actually the awareness that's reading these very words right now? The profound mystical realization that Joel Goldsmith experienced wasn't the result of intellectual study or religious doctrine. It came through direct experience, a moment of pure recognition that changed everything for him and could do the same for you. His revelation wasn't the product of years in theological seminaries or endless hours poring over ancient texts. It emerged from the depths of silent contemplation, from moments of complete surrender to that which exists beyond the thinking mind. If these teachings speak to your heart, hit subscribe to join our community of spiritual explorers on this journey of discovering the Christ consciousness within. You see, Joel Goldsmith had tried the conventional path. He'd studied spiritual texts, followed religious practices, and sought guidance from various teachers. But something fundamental was missing in this approach, a direct, lived experience of the truth he was seeking. The journey toward this revelation wasn't about accumulating more knowledge, but about allowing a deeper recognition to dawn within his consciousness. The breakthrough came during those quiet moments of pure presence, when the noise of mental chatter subsided and something else, something infinitely more profound, emerged into awareness. In that space of inner stillness, Goldsmith experienced a fundamental shift in perception. He saw with absolute clarity that the Christ consciousness he had been seeking had never been separate from him, not even for a millisecond. This wasn't just another spiritual insight to add to his collection of beliefs. It was a complete revolution in how he experienced himself and the world around him. The mindset transformation was so profound that it rippled through every aspect of his existence. Perhaps, most remarkably, chronic physical conditions that had plagued him for years, conditions that hadn't responded to medical treatments, simply dissolved without intervention. This wasn't faith healing in the conventional sense. It was the natural result of recognizing his true identity beyond the limited concept of a physical body subject to illness and deterioration. But the revelations didn't stop there. Financial concerns that had created constant worry and limitation in his life began resolving themselves in ways he couldn't have orchestrated through strategic planning or willpower. Abundance started flowing naturally, not because he was manifesting it through techniques or affirmations, but because he was living from a different foundation altogether, one where lack had never been the truth of his being. The hidden truth behind these seemingly miraculous transformations wasn't that Goldsmith had finally found the right spiritual technique or practice. It was that he had recognized something fundamental about the nature of consciousness itself. The impact of this recognition was so complete that his entire journey through life took on a different quality, one marked by grace rather than struggle, by allowing rather than forcing, by recognition rather than achievement. Now, I want to go even deeper into this topic by exploring what this profound spiritual understanding actually means for our day-to-day experience. When we begin to recognize that Christ consciousness isn't something distant or separate from us, but the very essence of our being, we discover a freedom that changes everything about how we navigate life's challenges and opportunities. The decision to recognize your true nature isn't just another spiritual step on an endless path. It's a fundamental reset of your entire relationship with existence. It's about discovering the ground of being that has always been present beneath the surface turbulence of thoughts, emotions, and changing circumstances. If you're feeling a resonance with these words, write in the comments, "I recognize the truth within." When we speak of recognizing that Christ lives within us, we're talking about something far more profound than simply adopting a new spiritual concept or belief system. This isn't about intellectually agreeing with a doctrine or repeating affirmations until you convince yourself of something. It's about a direct recognition of what is already true about your nature right now, in this very moment. Consider this revelation. The pure awareness that is reading these words right now, the consciousness that observes your thoughts arising and passing, that notices sensations in your body and emotions flowing through your experience. This awareness itself is Christ consciousness expressing as your individual being. It's not something you need to create, develop, or attain through spiritual practice. It's what you already are beneath the constant stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations that typically dominate your attention. This shift in perspective catalyzes a profound transformation in how you relate to the challenges and problems that inevitably arise in human experience. When you truly understand that Christ lives in you, you no longer approach difficulties from a place of lack, fear, or desperation. Your mindset undergoes a fundamental recalibration. Instead of seeing problems as obstacles to overcome or enemies to defeat, you begin to recognize them as opportunities to express your divine nature. The struggle against circumstances begins to dissolve as you realize that your essential being is already whole, perfect, and lacking absolutely nothing. This doesn't mean challenges magically disappear from your life. It means your relationship to them changes so completely that they no longer have the power to disturb your inner peace. Behind the scenes of this transformation is a revolutionary insight. The divine consciousness that constitutes your true identity isn't affected by any circumstance, condition, or temporary experience. Just as the sun continues shining regardless of passing clouds, your spiritual essence remains untouched by the changing weather patterns of human experience. This understanding creates a new foundation for navigating life's journey. Rather than constantly fighting against what is or desperately trying to change conditions through willpower and endless effort, you begin operating from a recognition of your inherent completeness. Decisions flow from a place of wisdom rather than fear. Actions emerge naturally, from clarity rather than from reaction to perceived threats or limitations. Subscribe now to deepen your understanding of these transformative spiritual principles that can completely reshape your experience of life's challenges. The impact of this shift extends far beyond just feeling better about your problems. It completely reconfigures how you move through the world. You begin experiencing what Goldsmith called divine indifference, which isn't callousness or lack of caring, but rather a profound stability that remains unshaken regardless of outer appearances. Let's explore this further by examining how this recognition illuminates our approach to the specific challenges that appear in our daily lives, whether they manifest as health concerns, relationship difficulties, or financial pressures. The pathway to freedom isn't about eliminating these situations, but recognizing the truth of who you are in relation to them. If you've experienced moments where you glimpse this deeper reality beyond your problems, write in the comments, "I've felt this peace within." When we begin living from this understanding, we naturally develop what Goldsmith called divine indifference. Now, this term might sound alarming at first, as if it suggests becoming cold or unfeeling toward the suffering in our world or in our own lives. But that's not at all what this concept describes. Divine indifference is actually a profound inner peace, a remarkable stability that remains unshaken, regardless of what's happening in the external world. Imagine standing in the eye of a hurricane. All around you, winds rage and destruction unfolds, yet where you stand, there is perfect stillness. This is the kind of centered presence that emerges when you recognize your true identity as spiritual being rather than as vulnerable human personality, subject to the countless forces that seem to control ordinary experience. This isn't spiritual bypassing or denial of human reality, it's anchoring your awareness in something more fundamental than the temporary weather patterns of circumstance. The insights behind this transformation have been whispered by mystics throughout the ages, yet they often get obscured by complex theological systems or diluted into intellectual concepts that miss the essential revelation. Here's where Goldsmith's teaching becomes truly revolutionary. He understood that the journey to spiritual awakening isn't about becoming something you're not currently. It's not about achieving enlightenment through decades of arduous practice or earning divine connection through virtuous behavior. The breakthrough realization is that you don't need to become spiritual. You already are a spiritual being in your essential nature. This mindset shift changes everything. Instead of approaching spirituality as a journey of achievement where you gradually accumulate enough merit, practice, or wisdom to finally reach a distant goal, you recognize what has always been true about you in this very moment. The Christ consciousness isn't something you must develop or attain. It's what you are beneath the layers of conditioned thinking and temporary human experience. This revelation often triggers a profound sense of relief. All those years of spiritual striving, of feeling like you're never quite there yet, suddenly reveal themselves as unnecessary. The paradigm completely shifts from becoming to being, from achieving to recognizing, from future attainment to present reality. Consider how this might transform your approach to meditation, prayer, or spiritual practice. Instead of using these as techniques to eventually reach enlightenment or divine connection, they become opportunities to clear away the temporary clouds of thought and emotion that obscure your recognition of what already is. They're not ladders to climb, but windows to open, allowing the light that's always been present to shine through more clearly. This approach completely reframes the spiritual journey. Rather than seeing yourself as a separate being trying to connect with a distant divine source, you recognize that the divine source is what you already are in your deepest essence. This isn't spiritual theory. It's the practical foundation for a completely different way of moving through life's challenges and opportunities. Let's explore how this recognition manifests in everyday experience, particularly when we face situations that would normally trigger stress, anxiety, or a sense of being overwhelmed. The practical application of this truth is where its power becomes most evident. If you've ever felt that spiritual growth was too complicated or out of reach, type in the comments, "I am already complete." What happens when this recognition of Christ consciousness becomes more than an occasional insight but your lived reality? Something truly remarkable begins to unfold in your relationships with others. Without any conscious effort to heal or help anyone, people around you start experiencing transformation simply by being in your presence. It's as if your clear recognition creates a field of energy, an atmosphere where others can more easily glimpse their own divine nature. This phenomenon isn't about developing special healing powers or becoming some kind of spiritual guru that others should follow. It's much more organic and natural than that. When you consistently live from the recognition of your true identity, you naturally stop reinforcing others' limited self-concepts and begin reflecting back to them their own innate wholeness. This silent acknowledgement often does more to facilitate healing than hours of well-intentioned advice or therapeutic intervention. This was precisely how Joel Goldsmith was able to facilitate remarkable healings for thousands of people throughout his ministry, without ever claiming to heal anyone or taking credit for the transformations that occurred. He simply maintained consistent recognition of spiritual truth, both about himself and those who came to him, creating a space where people could experience their own divine nature and the natural healing that flows from that recognition. The journey of Sarah illustrates this principle perfectly. After suffering from debilitating anxiety disorder for 15 long years, she had become desperate for relief. She had tried everything: multiple medications, cognitive behavioral therapy, breathing techniques, meditation apps, energy healing, and countless other approaches. Thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours later, she still lived in constant fear, with her nervous system perpetually in fight-or-flight mode. When Sarah first encountered these teachings about Christ consciousness being her true identity, she initially dismissed them as impractical religious platitudes. How could abstract spiritual concepts possibly help with the very real, intense physical symptoms that often left her unable to function normally? But something deep within her recognized a ring of truth in these words that went beyond her intellectual skepticism. Rather than adding another technique to her arsenal of anxiety management strategies, Sarah began practicing something radically different. During moments when anxiety was particularly overwhelming, instead of fighting against the sensations or trying to make them go away through various coping mechanisms, she would silently acknowledge the divine presence within her. This anxiety is something I'm experiencing, but it is not what I am. This simple recognition created space between her true self and the temporary emotional weather passing through her experience. She wasn't denying the anxiety or pretending it wasn't happening. She was simply recognizing that these sensations and thoughts, however intense, weren't her fundamental identity. The blueprint for transformation had been activated. Within just a few weeks, something profound began shifting. The anxiety didn't magically disappear overnight, but her relationship to it changed so completely that the same feelings no longer had the power to control her life. She began experiencing a deep, unshakable peace underlying all surface emotions, like discovering still waters beneath turbulent waves. Let's explore how this same principle applies to other areas of human experience where suffering seems inevitable, and how this recognition creates pathways to freedom that conventional approaches often miss entirely. If you've struggled with anxiety or emotional patterns that seem impossible to break, write in the comments, "I am not my emotions." Michael's story reveals another dimension of this profound truth. When facing severe financial crisis that threatened to destroy everything he had worked for throughout his adult life, he found himself at a breaking point. His business had failed, debts were mounting to overwhelming proportions, and he felt completely desperate, even abandoned by God. He began questioning everything he had believed about spiritual principles. When a close friend introduced Michael to Goldsmith's teachings about divine sonship and infinite supply, his initial reaction was skepticism. How could abstract spiritual concepts possibly solve very concrete problems like mortgage payments and business obligations? Like many of us, he wanted to use spiritual truth as a technique to fix his dire financial situation, essentially treating divine principles as a sophisticated manifestation. Method. The watershed moment came when Michael completely abandoned this approach. Instead of trying to use spiritual practices to attract money or manipulate circumstances, he began living from the recognition of his spiritual identity as the consciousness in which infinite supply already exists as present reality. Each morning, he would acknowledge the unlimited abundance within his own consciousness, not as a method for attracting prosperity, but as simple recognition of what was already true about his spiritual nature, regardless of bank account balances. This strategic mindset shift created space for something remarkable to unfold. New opportunities began appearing in the most unexpected ways and through the most unlikely channels. Former clients he hadn't heard from in years suddenly contacted him with profitable projects. Investment opportunities surfaced through casual conversations that led to significant returns he never could have planned or orchestrated. Yet, the true miracle wasn't the improved financial circumstances. The real transformation was Michael's entire relationship to security and abundance. He no longer lived in constant fear and worry about money because he finally understood that his true source wasn't external circumstances, but the infinite consciousness within him. The journey revealed that he had never actually been separate from his source of supply, the infinite creative intelligence that expresses as individual consciousness and naturally attracts everything needed for abundant living. Margaret's healing journey illuminates this same principle from an entirely different angle. After receiving a devastating diagnosis of advanced cancer that had spread throughout her body and wasn't responding to conventional treatments, doctors gave her only 6 months to live. She had exhausted all medical options. Traditional chemotherapy and radiation had failed to slow the progression of her condition. Feeling hopeless, angry, and terrified about leaving her young children without a mother, Margaret initially rejected spiritual approaches completely. When someone suggested that Christ consciousness was her true identity, she felt furious that anyone would offer what seemed like empty spiritual platitudes during such a profound medical crisis. Yet in her darkest moment of despair, something deep within her consciousness was willing to consider an alternative perspective, that there might be a truth about her identity that existed beyond medical diagnosis and statistical prognoses. She began spending time each day, not desperately praying for healing or bargaining with God, but simply resting in the quiet recognition of her spiritual wholeness that existed prior to any physical condition or medical label. This revelation began shifting Margaret's consciousness in subtle yet profound ways. Instead of identifying herself primarily as a person with cancer who might die, she started recognizing herself as eternal spiritual consciousness temporarily experiencing physical challenges. This wasn't denial of her medical condition or refusal of appropriate treatment. It was recognition of a deeper identity that remained whole, regardless of what appeared to be happening in her physical form. If you've ever faced a seemingly impossible health challenge or financial situation, share in the comments. I am more than my circumstances. These powerful stories of transformation aren't isolated incidents or rare spiritual achievements reserved for specially gifted individuals. They reflect what becomes possible when we integrate this recognition into our daily lives through simple yet profound practices. One of the most essential techniques Joel Goldsmith taught was maintaining what he called the listening attitude throughout your day. This listening attitude isn't about straining to hear an external God speaking to you in words or waiting for dramatic mystical experiences. It's about cultivating a gentle, ongoing awareness of the divine presence within your own consciousness during all daily activities. Whether you're in a business meeting, preparing dinner, having a conversation, or driving in traffic, you can maintain this subtle recognition of the Christ consciousness that constitutes your true identity. The practice is beautifully simple. Throughout your day, take brief moments to simply pause and silently acknowledge, "The Christ that I am is present right now." You don't need to feel anything special or achieve any particular spiritual state. Simply recognize this truth about your identity in the present moment. This isn't about adding another task to your already busy schedule. It's about bringing a different quality of awareness to everything you're already doing. This practice gradually shifts your center of identity from personality, circumstances, emotions and thoughts to the changeless divine consciousness within you. Decisions begin flowing from inner wisdom rather than fear or conditioned patterns. Your actions become expressions of your spiritual nature rather than reactions to external triggers. This is what Goldsmith called living by grace, allowing divine intelligence to guide your journey naturally, without the constant struggle of human will and effort. This inner recognition naturally extends to how you perceive others as well. When you encounter someone experiencing challenges, difficulties, illness, or any form of limitation, instead of sympathizing with their problems or getting caught up in their narrative of suffering, you can silently recognize their spiritual identity. You see them as divine consciousness, appearing in human form rather than identifying them with their temporary circumstances or personality patterns. This silent acknowledgement isn't about ignoring practical needs or being coldly detached. It's about recognizing something fundamental about others that they may have temporarily forgotten about themselves. The illumination that comes from this recognition creates an atmosphere where healing and transformation can occur naturally through their own awakening to their true nature. The ripple effects of this practice are often astonishing. People begin sensing something different in your presence, a quality of acceptance and recognition that allows their own divine nature to surface more easily. Many report feeling mysteriously peaceful, inspired, or suddenly clear about solutions to problems after being with someone who practices this recognition consistently. The subtle power of this approach lies in its simplicity. You're not trying to change anyone, fix their problems, or convince them of spiritual truth. You're simply maintaining awareness of what they truly are, regardless of appearances, which creates a field where their own healing intelligence can activate naturally. Let's examine how this practice transforms our most challenging relationships and situations in ways that conventional approaches often miss entirely. If you've experienced how your perception of others affects their behavior and well-being, write in the comments, "I hold the vision of wholeness." Another powerful dimension of this practice reveals itself when we face challenging emotions that typically overwhelm or destabilize us. Joel taught a remarkably effective approach for handling difficult emotions through spiritual recognition rather than through suppression, analysis, or resistance, methods that often intensify our suffering rather than alleviating it. When anger, fear, sadness, or any intense emotion arises in your experience, instead of fighting against it or getting caught in analyzing why it's happening, simply recognize your true identity in relation to it. Acknowledge silently, "I am experiencing anger right now, but anger is not what I am. I am the divine consciousness observing this temporary emotional weather pattern." This insight creates a healthy space between your essential nature and passing emotional experiences. You're not denying or suppressing the emotion, quite the opposite. You're allowing it to be fully present in your awareness, while simultaneously recognizing that your fundamental identity remains untouched by any temporary feeling state. This perspective shift enables emotions to move through your experience naturally without becoming stuck or defining your self-concept. The freedom this practice brings is revolutionary. Most of us spend enormous energy either fighting against uncomfortable emotions or becoming completely identified with them, both approaches that keep us trapped in cycles of reactivity and suffering. This recognition offers a third path that neither suppresses nor indulges emotional patterns, but allows them to be present within the spaciousness of your true nature. When we extend this understanding to all areas of life, a comprehensive transformation begins unfolding naturally. Consider how your approach to work shifts when you live consistently from the awareness that Christ lives in you as your actual identity. Your career becomes an expression of your divine nature rather than a struggle for survival, security, or personal achievement. Business decisions begin flowing from inner wisdom and genuine service rather than from the fear, competition, or ego ambition that characterizes most commercial activity. You find yourself naturally attracted to opportunities and relationships that align with your spiritual values and support your highest expression, while situations that compromise your integrity or drain your energy naturally fall away without dramatic confrontations or forced exits. Your presence in meetings, collaborative projects, and all professional interactions takes on a quality that others notice and appreciate, even if they can't quite articulate what feels different about working with you. Similarly, all relationships undergo profound transformation when you consistently recognize the divine nature in yourself and others. Instead of relating to people based on their personality patterns, past behavior, or current circumstances, you maintain awareness of their spiritual identity beneath temporary expressions. This doesn't mean ignoring practical considerations or avoiding appropriate boundaries. Rather, you combine spiritual recognition with human wisdom, creating space for others to express their highest qualities naturally. When you stop reacting to people's limited expressions and consistently see their divine nature, they often begin responding from that higher level of their being. The blueprint of this approach creates pathways for resolving conflicts and healing relationships that conventional approaches often miss entirely. If you've noticed how your inner state affects your external environment and relationships, type in the comments, "As within, so without." As we come to this moment of reflection in our exploration of Joel Goldsmith's profound teaching that Christ lives within you, I hope you've glimpsed something beyond intellectual understanding, perhaps a recognition of your own divine nature that was always present beneath the surface of your human experience. This recognition isn't something you achieve through effort, but something you allow yourself to remember in moments of presence. The journey of integrating this understanding into daily life is both beautifully simple and endlessly deep. If something in this message resonated with your own inner knowing, I'd love to continue this conversation with you in the comments. Simply write, "I recognize the Christ within," to let me know these teachings found their home in you. If you found value in this perspective, consider subscribing to join our community of spiritual explorers. Each week, we dive into these transformative principles that have the power to completely reconfigure your relationship with life's challenges and opportunities. Your subscription helps us continue creating content that points toward the deepest truths of our being. Leaving a like on this video helps others discover these teachings at exactly the moment they may need them most. A synchronicity that often brings these principles to people precisely when they're ready to receive them. I've created a video that explores how to apply these principles specifically to healing relationships that seem beyond repair. It's a perfect complement to what we've discussed today, revealing how the recognition of divine consciousness transforms even our most challenging connections. Click right here to continue this journey of discovery with me. The divine presence that you are is already complete, I'm simply honored to remind you of what you've always known.